A shadow moved through the streets of Ouagadougou, cloaked in the dust of a city that never sleeps. It was not a man, not a ghost, but a lie carefully crafted, wrapped in a smile, and carrying a briefcase full of secrets. He called himself Claude, a consultant from Paris, here to help Burkina Faso rebuild. His handshake was firm, his French accent smooth, his promises sweeter than the mangoes sold in the morning markets. But his eyes betrayed him. They darted, always searching, always watching, and someone was watching back. In the heart of this land, where the sun burns truth into the soil, a lion stood tall. Ibrahim Traoré, the youngest leader in Africa, was no stranger to deception. He had seen it before: men in suits, men with maps, men who spoke of aid but dreamed of control. They came to Burkina Faso not to build, but to break, not to lift, but to bind. Claude was just the latest. His footsteps echoed in the corridors of power, but Traoré's ears were sharper than the blades of the Sahel. He heard the whispers. He felt the weight of betrayal in the air. And he waited. The game began in silence. Claude's meetings were discreet, held in hotel rooms where the curtains stayed drawn. He met with men whose loyalty could be bought, men whose hearts had forgotten the rhythm of their own land. Money changed hand-crisp euros, wired from accounts in far-off cities. Promises were made: power, protection, a seat at a table that was never meant for Burkina Faso. Claude's plan was a spider's web, delicate but deadly. He seeded lies in the press, whispers of Traoré's weakness, of a nation crumbling under a leader too young to rule. He hired voices to shout chaos in the streets, to paint division where unity stood. And all the while, he thought no one saw. But Traoré saw everything. His intelligence unit, a brotherhood forged in the fires of revolution, moved like ghosts. They traced Claude's calls to numbers that led nowhere. They followed his drivers to safe houses, where maps glowed red under flickering lights. They listened as Claude spoke of the operation, of deadlines, of signals from Paris. Every word was a thread, and Traoré was weaving it into a noose. He let Claude believe he was winning. He let the spider spin its web. And then, when the moment was ripe, he struck. The sun rose on a day that would shake the world. In Ouagadougou's largest square, thousands gathered, their faces lifted to a stage where Traoré stood. His voice was thunder, his gaze a blade. "They think we are blind," he began, and the crowd held its breath. "They think we are deaf. They think we will bow." He raised a hand, and a screen behind him flickered to life. Emails, stark and damning, filled the display. Claude's words, his plans, his masters. Bank records glowed like embers, showing the trail of euros from Paris to the hands of traitors. A recording played, Claude's voice, smooth and arrogant, promising chaos. The crowd roared, a tidal wave of fury and pride. Traoré's words cut deeper. "This is not a game. This is our home. And you, Claude, are no longer welcome." The square erupted. Fists punched the air. Drums beat the rhythm of defiance. Across Burkina Faso, the news spread like wildfire. Claude's face, once hidden behind his consultant's smile, was now plastered on every screen, every wall. The people took to the streets, not in chaos, but in unity. They painted murals of Traoré, the lion who roared. Hashtags, "We see you," "Lion of Ouagadougou," up the digital world, shared by millions who had never set foot in the Sahel but felt its pulse. A song was born, its lyrics simple but searing. You cannot arrest a lion by calling him to dinner. It echoed from radios, from rooftops, from the hearts of a nation reborn. This was not just a victory, it was a revelation. The world saw Burkina Faso not as a pawn, but as a power. Traoré had not just captured a spy, he had captured a truth. They used to come with guns, their boots heavy on African soil. Now they come with cameras, with contracts, with smiles that hide knives. But the eyes of Africa are open now. We see the soft faces, but we know the same old plans. We hear the promises, but we feel the chains they bring. And we will not be silent. The days that followed were electric. In the markets, women wove Traoré's name into their songs. In the schools, Children drew lions on their chalkboards. On the streets, young men stood taller, their chests swollen with a pride that no foreign hand could steal. Claude was gone. Say he fled to Paris. Others say he faces justice in a place where no cameras go. But his shadow lingers, a reminder that the fight is not over. Traore knows this. He walks among his people, not as a king, but as a brother. His eyes, like the Sahel's horizon, see far beyond the present. He knows they will come again, and he will be ready. This is the fire that burns in Burkina Faso, a fire that cannot be quenched. It is the fire of a people who have learned to see, to stand, to roar. It is the fire of a leader who carries a nation not on his shoulders, but in his heart. They thought they could break us with their spies, their money, their lies. But we are not the Burkina Faso of yesterday. We are the Burkina Faso of tomorrow, and our tomorrow is ours to shape. Look to the horizon, see the dust rise, hear the drums beat, feel the ground tremble. This is not the end of the story, it is the beginning. The lion has roared, and the world will never be the same. We see you now, and we will never close our eyes again. The air in Ouagadougou crackled with something fiercer than the dry season's heat. It was the pulse of a people awakened, their voices rising like a storm over the Sahel. The square where Traoré had unmasked Claude was no longer just a placet, was a crucible where fear was burned away and courage was forged. The murals grew bolder, their colors shouting from every wall, a lion's face, eyes blazing, Traoré's silhouette against a rising sun. The hashtags multiplied, spilling beyond borders, carried by fingers tapping in Accra, Nairobi, Addis Ababa. We see you wasn't just a phrase, no, it was a vow, etched into the soul of a continent. In the days that followed, the streets became a canvas. Women in vibrant head wraps danced, their steps a defiance of every lie Claude had sown. Their songs wove Traoré's name with the names of ancestors, as if he were not just a man, but a spirit reborn. Children ran through the dust, chanting the song that had become an anthem. You cannot arrest a lion by calling him to dinner. Their laughter was a blade, cutting through the heavy silence that foreign powers had once demanded. And the young men, their eyes sharp as spears, gathered in courtyards, vowing to protect what Traoré had defended. They called themselves the Watchers, not soldiers but sentinels, their loyalty not to a flag but to the truth. Across the city, the evidence Traoré had revealed was dissected, devoured, shared. The emails, with their cold, calculated words, were printed on flyers and passed hand to hand. The bank records, those glowing trails of betrayal, were studied in cafes where students argued late into the night. The recording of Claude's voice, his smug assurance that Burkina Faso would fall, played on every radio, every phone, until its cadence was as familiar as a drumbeat. This was no longer just a story. It was a weapon. The people wielded it not with violence, but with clarity. They knew now what they were fighting for. They knew now who they were fighting against. Beyond the borders, the world began to stir. In Paris, politicians shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their denials hollow against the weight of Traoré's proof. In newsrooms from London to New York, anchors stumbled over the story, unsure how to frame a narrative that refused to fit their scripts. But on the ground, in the digital trenches of X and TikTok, the truth ran wild. A video of Traoré's speech, subtitled in a dozen languages, racked up millions of views. Comments flooded in. This is Africa's time. The lion has spoken. We see you too. The hashtags became a global chant, a rhythm that pulsed from Lagos to Sao Paulo, from Harlem to Harare. Burkina Faso was no longer a footnote in someone else's history. It was the spark of a fire that could not be contained. Yet even as the people celebrated, Traoré did not rest. He walked the streets of Ouagadougou, his presence quiet but unshakable. He met with the Watchers, listening as they spoke of vigilance, of eyes that would never close. He visited the markets, where women pressed gifts of cloth and fruit into his hands, their smiles brighter than the sun. He stood in schools, watching children draw lions, and his silence spoke louder than any speech. This was his strength, not the pomp of power, but the rootedness of a man who knew his people's heartbeat. He saw the murals, the songs, the hashtags, and he understood. This was not about him. This was about a nation claiming its place, a continent claiming its future. But the shadows were not gone. Claude may have fled, his briefcase empty, his plans in ruins, but others waited. Traore knew this. His intelligence unit worked in the dead of night, tracing new threads, new whispers. They found coded messages in emails that spoke of Plan B. They uncovered safe houses where maps still glowed, their red circles marking not just Ouagadougou, but Bamako, Niamey, Dakar. The spider's web had been torn, but its makers were spinning again. And Traore, the lion, was already stalking. This was the rhythm of the fight victory, vigilance, vision. The people felt it too. In the villages beyond the city, elders gathered under baobab trees, telling stories of resistance that stretched back centuries. They spoke of Traore not as a savior, but as a son, one who carried their fire into a new age. In the mosques and churches, prayers rose, not for peace, but for strength. And in the hearts of the young, a new dream took root. A Burkina Faso that answered to no one, a Burkina Faso that wrote its own story. The world watched, some with awe, others with fear. Those who had sent Claude, those who had funded his lies, saw now what they had unleashed. They had thought Burkina Faso would crumble, that its people would kneel. But the people stood, they sang, they painted, they shared. And their voices, amplified by a leader who refused to bow, reached places no spy could touch. This was the power of truth, not whispered in secret rooms, but shouted in the open. This was the power of a lion who roared not for himself, but for his pride. And so the fire spread. It burned in the eyes of every man who joined the Watchers, in the hands of every woman who wove Traore's name into her cloth, in the voices of every child who sang of the lion. It burned in the hashtags that lit up screens across the globe, in the murals that turned walls into declarations. It burned in Traore's heart, a flame that no shadow could extinguish. This was not the end. This was the awakening. And the world would learn, when Africa rises, its roar shakes the earth. The fire that roared in Ouagadougou did not flicker. It surged, a blaze that leapt from heart to heart, from one dust-swept street to another. The people of Burkina Faso carried Traore's name not as a title, but as a permissive vow that the days of bowing were over. In the markets, where the scent of shea butter mingled with the heat of noon, women paused their bargaining to speak of him. Their voices trembled, not with fear, but with a love so fierce it could split stone. "He is our son," they said, their hands clutching baskets as if to hold the weight of their pride. "He sees us. He fights for us." Their eyes, bright as the cloth they wore, glistened with tears that were not of sorrow, but of a joy reborn. In the quiet of dawn, when the city still slept, old men gathered in courtyards, their canes tapping the earth like drums. They spoke of Traore with reverence, their words slow but heavy, as if each syllable carried the weight of a century's struggle. "We have seen leaders come and go," one elder said, his voice cracked by time but steady with truth. "But this one is different. He does not sit above us. He stands with us." They nodded, their gazes fixed on the horizon, where the sun rose like a witness to their faith. For them, Traore was not just a president. He was the son they had prayed for, the one who carried their dreams into the light. The young felt it too, their hearts beating to a rhythm that was both ancient and new. In the schools, children scribbled his name in the margins of their notebooks, their pencils dancing as if possessed. They drew lions with crowns of fire, their small hands trembling with the thrill of creation. "He is like us," a girl whispered to her friend, her braids swinging as she leaned closer. "He is young, but he is strong." Her friend nodded, her eyes wide with a dream she could not yet name. They sang his anthem in the schoolyard, their voices high and unbroken, carrying the words, "You cannot arrest a lion by calling him to dinner," into the wind. It was more than a song. It was a pledge, a fire kindled in their chests that would burn for a lifetime. This love was not blind. It was forged in the clarity of Traore's actions, in the way he walked among them, his boots as dusty as their own. When he visited a village outside Ouagadougou, The crowd pressed close, not to worship, but to touch the man who had given them back their dignity. A mother thrust her child into his arms, her face alight with trust. "His name is Ibrahim," she said, her voice breaking. Traore smiled, his eyes softening as he held the boy. And in that moment, the crowd saw not a leader, but a brother. They wept openly, their tears carving paths through the dust on their cheeks, their hands raised not in salute, but in gratitude. This was their lion, and they would follow him to the ends of the earth. The streets pulsed with this emotion, a current that ran deeper than words. In the evenings, families gathered around radios, their faces lit by the glow of shared hope. They listened to Traore's speeches, his voice steady as the Sahel's heartbeat, and they felt it, the certainty that they were no longer alone. "He speaks for us," a father said, his hand resting on his son's shoulder. "When he stands, we stand taller." His wife nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of a cloth embroidered with a lion's face. They did not cheer. They did not need to. Their silence was louder, a quiet so full of love it could drown out the lies of 1,000 spies. This love spilled into action. The watchers, those young sentinels who had sworn to protect the truth, grew in number. They were not just men, now women joined them, their eyes as fierce as any blade. They patrolled the streets, not with guns, but with vigilance, their phones flashing as they shared updates on X. A stranger seen near the ministry. A car with no plates. Their posts were shared thousands of times, each one a spark in the fire of defiance. "We are Traore's eyes," a watcher wrote, her words blazing across screens. "We see you now." The people read it, and their hearts swelled, not with anger, but with a pride that felt like flight. Beyond Burkina Faso, this love became a beacon. In Dakar, students painted Traore murals, their brushes dripping with gold. In Johannesburg, poets wove his story into verses that echoed in packed theaters. On X, a Ghanaian artist shared a drawing of Traore, his face framed by a rising sun, captioned, "The Lion Who Woke Us." It was viewed millions of times. Each share a thread in a tapestry that stretched across oceans. The world felt Burkina Faso's heartbeat now, and it was not just a rhythm, it was a call to stand, to see, to roar. But Traore did not bask in this love. He carried it like a shield, knowing the shadows were still moving. His intelligence unit uncovered new trace emails that spoke of contingencies, bank transfers routed through shell companies in Europe. The maps in the safe houses had shifted, their red circles now marking new targets. Traore studied them in the dead of night, his face lit by the glow of a single lamp. He did not flinch. He did not waver. He knew the love of his people was not just a gift, it was a weapon, stronger than any spy's scheme. And so, the fire grew. It burned in the mother who named her son Ibrahim, in the elder who saw hope in a young man's eyes, in the child who sang of lions. It burned in the watchers who stood guard, in the artists who painted truth, in the poets who gave it wings. This was not just Burkina Faso's fight. It was Africa's awakening. The lion had roared, and his people roared with him. They were not just seen, they were unstoppable. And the world, watching through screens and streets, felt the earth shift beneath its feet. The earth beneath Burkina Faso trembled with the weight of a people who had found their voice. It was not just Ouagadougou that sang now. The villages, the plains, the rivers carried the echo of Traore's stand. In the far north, where the Sahel's sands whispered of forgotten battles, herders paused their flocks to speak of the lion. Their words were spare, carved by a life of hardship, but their eyes burned with a fire that no desert could quench. "He has given us back our name," one said, his hand resting on a staff worn smooth by generations. "We are not just a place on their maps, we are Burkina Faso." His companions nodded, their silhouettes sharp against the dusk, and in their silence a vow was made to carry this pride beyond the horizon. This pride was a living thing, a current that surged through every corner of the nation. In the south, where the forests whispered secrets to the wind, farmers gathered after the harvest, their hands still dusted with earth. They spoke of Traore not as a distant figure, but as a son who had walked their paths. When he spoke of the spy, a woman said, her voice steady as she braided her daughter's hair. It was as if he spoke for my fields, my home. Her neighbors murmured agreement, their faces lit by a fire that danced in the night. They did not need to see Claude's emails or hear his recorded voice. They felt the truth in Traoré's defiance, and it was enough to make their hearts soar. This was the alchemy of Traoré's leadership, not just to reveal, but to ignite. He had taken the cold facts of betrayal emails, bank records, maps and turned them into a flame that warmed a nation. The people did not just know the truth, they lived it. In the cities, barbers clipped hair to the rhythm of Traoré's anthem, their scissors flashing as customers debated the future. He showed them we are not fools, one man said, his laughter sharp as he leaned back in the chair. They sent a spy, and we sent him running. The shop erupted in cheers, the sound spilling into the street, where passers-by joined in, their voices weaving a tapestry of joy and resolve. That resolve was Traoré's greatest weapon. He knew the love of his people was not a fleeting spark, but a foundation, strong as the baobab that stood through storms. He moved with purpose, his days filled with meetings that stretched into the night. In a modest office, far from the grandeur of foreign capitals, he pored over reports with his intelligence unit. The maps they studied were not just paper, they were battlegrounds, marked with new red circles that spoke of threats still lurking. An email, intercepted just before dawn, hinted at a meeting in a neighboring capital. A voice, recorded in a crackling audio file, mentioned the next phase. Traoré's face was stone, but his eyes were alive, tracing every thread, every shadow. He did not speak of fear, he spoke of readiness. The people felt this readiness too. The Watchers, now a movement that spanned cities and villages, trained their eyes on the smallest details. A woman in a market stall noticed a man who lingered too long, his camera pointed not at the fruit, but at the faces. She alerted a watcher, her voice low but firm, and within hours, the man was gone, his intentions unmasked. A boy, no older than 12, spotted a car with foreign plates circling his neighborhood. He ran to his uncle, a watcher, and by nightfall, the car was tracked to a house where lights burned too late. These were not acts of paranoia, they were acts of power, the power of a people who had learned to see. This vigilance was not just localite, was global. On X, the hashtags multiplied, each one a flare in the digital sky. Lion of Waga trended alongside Africa Rising, shared by voices from every corner of the earth. A Nigerian student posted a video, her words sharp as she held up a sign. We are all Burkina Faso. It was viewed 1,000,000 times in a day, each share a ripple in a growing wave. In Paris, where Claude's masters scrambled to control the narrative, protesters gathered outside an embassy, their banners bold, "Hands off Africa." The images flooded X, each one a reminder that Traoré's stand had cracked open a truth too big to contain. The world was watching, and it was learning to roar. But Traoré did not seek the spotlight. He stood in the shadows of his own victories, letting his people shine. When a group of artists presented him with a mural's face framed by a lion's mane, the words, "We see you," blazing beneath, he did not pose for cameras. He touched the wall, his fingers tracing the paint, and said, "This is not for me. This is for us." The artists wept, their hands trembling as they clasped his, and the crowd that had gathered fell silent, their hearts too full for words. This was the man they loved not for his titles, but for his truth. That truth was a beacon, guiding Burkina Faso through the storm. The threats did not stop. New emails surfaced, new maps were found, new voices whispered of plans to come, but the people were no longer afraid. They had seen the lion stand, and they had stood with him. They had felt the fire of their own pride, and it would not be extinguished. In the markets, the songs grew louder. In the villages, the stories grew bolder. In the hearts of a nation, a vision took root not just of survival, but of triumph. This was the legacy of Traoré's stand, not a moment, but a movement. It was the legacy of a people who had learned to see, to speak, to fight. It was the legacy of a continent that had opened its eyes and would never close them again. The lion had roared, and the echo would carry far beyond the Sahel, far beyond the maps of those who sought to control it. This was not just Burkina Faso's story. This was Africa's dawn, and its light would burn forever. The dawn broke over Burkina Faso, not with the soft hush of morning, but with a roar that lingered in the bones of the land. It was the sound of a people who had tasted truth and would never settle for less. In the heart of Ouagadougou, where the streets pulsed with life, a new rhythm emerged, not just in songs or drums, but in the way people moved, the way they looked at each other. Eyes met with a knowing spark, as if sharing a secret too powerful for words. Hands clasped with a strength that said, "We are here, and we are unbreakable." This was Traoré's gift, not just the unmasking of a spy, but the unveiling of a nation's soul. In the neighborhoods where concrete met dust, families gathered under the shade of mango trees, their voices weaving stories that felt like scripture. A grandmother, her face etched with the lines of a life hard lived, spoke of Traoré as if he were her own. "He stood before the world," she said, her hands slicing the air. And he said, "This is ours." My heart beat so loud I thought it would break. Her grandchildren listened, wide-eyed, their small fingers tracing lions in the dirt. They did not yet know the weight of her words, but they felt a warmth that settled in their chests, a pride that would grow with them like the roots of the baobab. This pride was not quiet. It spilled into the streets, where motorbikes roared past murals that seemed to breathe. The artists, young and fearless, worked through the night, their brushes dancing to the rhythm of Traoré's anthem. One mural showed a lion tearing through a web, its claws sharp as truth. Beneath it, in bold red paint, "You cannot hide from us now." Crowds gathered, their phones flashing as they captured the image, sending it racing across X, where it became a banner for a movement. "This is our story," a young painter said, her voice fierce as she wiped paint from her hands. "And we will tell it ourselves." The crowd cheered, their voices a thunder that shook the earth. Traoré felt this thunder. He carried it in his steps as he moved through the city, his presence a quiet storm. He did not seek adulation, he sought connection. In a crowded market, he stopped to buy mangoes from a vendor, his smile easy as he listened to her story. She spoke of her son, a watcher who patrolled the streets, and her voice cracked with pride. "He learned from you," she said, pressing a mango into his hand. Traoré nodded, his eyes steady, and in that moment, the market seemed to hold its breath. This was not a president on a pedestal. This was a man who carried his people's dreams in his calloused hands. But dreams alone do not win battles. Traoré knew the shadows were restless, their plans shifting like sand in the wind. In a dimly lit room, his intelligence unit spread new maps across a table, their edges curling under the weight of truth. Red circles marked new threat safehouses in Bamako, coded signals from Abidjan, bank accounts that flickered to life in the night. An audio file, barely audible, carried a voice speaking of escalation. Traoré listened, his face unreadable, but his hands were steady, folding the map with the precision of a hunter. He did not speak of victory, he spoke of vigilance. "They will try again," he said, his voice low, "and we will be ready." The people were ready too. The Watchers had become more than a group, they were a heartbeat, pulsing through every village, every street. A teacher in Bobo Dioulasso noticed a stranger at a school, his questions too sharp, his smile too thin. She alerted a watcher, her voice calm but urgent, and by morning, the stranger was gone, his bag of cameras empty. In a northern village, a farmer saw lights in an abandoned barn, their flicker unnatural in the dark. He rode through the night to find a watcher, and by dawn, the barn was silent, its secrets seized. These were the eyes of Burkina Faso, wide open, unblinking, fierce. This fierceness was a language now, spoken not just in Burkina Faso, but across the continent. In Addis Ababa, students marched, their banners blazing with Traoré's words. "We see you now." In Lagos, a rapper dropped a track titled Lion's Roar. Its beat heavy with the pulse of Ouagadougou's streets. It climbed charts, its lyrics shared on X with a ferocity that matched the murals. They came with lies, we came with fire. In Cape Town, a poet stood before a crowd, her voice rising like a tide. The lion does not sleep. The lion does not kneel. Her words were recorded, shared, retweeted, until they reached the edges of the earth, each syllable a spark in a growing blaze. The world could not ignore this blaze. In foreign capitals, where power was measured in wealth and weapons, Traore's stand was a riddle they could not solve. They had sent Claude with his briefcase, his euros, his arrogance, thinking Burkina Faso would bend. But Burkina Faso stood, its people a wall of fire and will. On X, a French journalist posted a question: "Who is this Traoré, and why can't they stop him?" The replies flooded in, not with explanations, but with images, murals, marches, children singing. The answer was not in words, it was in the faces of a nation that had learned to roar. Traoré saw these faces, and they were his strength. He stood before a crowd in a small town, his voice steady as he spoke of the future. "They will come again," he said, his words cutting through the dusk. "But we are not the same. We are awake. We are alive." The crowd did not cheer. They wept, their hands raised as if to touch the sky. They saw in him not just a leader, but a mirror reflection of their own unbreakable spirit. This was the fire that burned in Burkina Faso, a fire that no shadow could touch. And so the story grew, not as a tale of one man, but of a people, a continent, a world. The lion had roared, and the echo was a promise. No more lies, no more chains, no more silence. The eyes of Africa were open, and they would never close again. The dawn was here, and it belonged to those who dared to stand. The dawn that broke over Burkina Faso was not just light, it was a blade, cutting through the fog of centuries. It illuminated faces that had once been shadowed, voices that had once been silenced. In the heart of this awakening, Traoré stood not as a symbol, but as a spark, igniting a fire that burned brighter with every heartbeat. The people felt it in their bones, a certainty that this moment, this stand was not fleeting. It was eternal, a truth carved into the red earth of the Sahel, a promise that no foreign hand could erase. They looked to Traoré, and in his eyes they saw their own reflection, fierce, unbroken, alive. In the villages where the dust danced with the wind, elders gathered under starlit skies, their stories weaving a tapestry of defiance. An old woman, her hands gnarled as the roots of the shea tree, spoke of Traoré with a voice that trembled with awe. "He is not just one of us," she said, her eyes glinting like embers. "He is all of us." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of history, and the young who listened felt their hearts swell. They saw in Traoré the courage of their ancestors, the fire of those who had fought with spears and songs. They vowed to carry that fire forward, to make it their own. This vow was not spoken in grand halls, but in the quiet moments of daily life. In the markets, where the clatter of coins mixed with laughter, vendors named their stalls after Traoré. "Lion's Pride," one sign read, its letters bold against the wood. The woman who owned it, her smile wide as the horizon, gave fruit to children who sang his anthem. "He gave us back our eyes," she said, her voice thick with gratitude. "Now we see the world as it is." Her customers nodded, their hands lingering on her goods, as if to hold the truth she spoke. This was not just commerce, it was communion, a shared belief that Burkina Faso was no longer a name, but a force. Traoré carried this belief like a torch. He moved through the nation, his presence a quiet thunder that drew crowds without effort. In a small town near the Mali border, he knelt beside a farmer whose crops had withered in the drought. The man's hands shook as he spoke of loss, but Traoré's voice was steady, his words a lifeline. "We will rebuild," he said, his hand resting on the farmer's shoulder. "Not for them, but for us." The farmer wept, his tears falling to the cracked earth, and the crowd that had gathered felt the words settle in their souls. They saw in Traoré not a savior, but a brother, one who carried their pain and turned it into purpose. That purpose was a shield against the shadows that still